Stop for a second and picture this. In the middle of a forest, beneath the ground, there's a pit no one has touched in 1,000 years. Growing right on top of it is a 100-year-old tree, its trunk rising straight out of the pit itself. That tree alone tells you something. This pit is older than the tree. Now tell me, who dug it? The 1840s. In northern Michigan, on the cold shores of Lake Superior, a group of miners begins breaking ground. They're certain that what they'll find is untouched, virgin copper deposits. Riches were waiting for them, or so they thought. But the moment they started digging, what they found froze them in place. Someone had already been working this ground before them. This wasn't a single pit stumbled on by one man. It was a vast network spread across an entire region, thousands of pits. And this is only the beginning of the story, because a little later these men would find themselves standing inside a mystery worth billions of pounds. And 30 years after that, the elders of a people living on the shore of the lake would hand down to you the missing piece of that mystery. If you're ready, let's begin with documents, excavations, and stone tools. 1863. Charles Whittlesey, a geologist working on behalf of the U.S. government, spends years surveying the land around Lake Superior. His task is simple: document what American mining companies are finding. But what he found was not part of the plan. Whittlesey and the engineers who came after him repeatedly ran into the same site across the Keweenaw Peninsula and the northern islands of Lake Superior, thousands of ancient mine pits. Some were shallow traces barely visible beneath the forest floor. Others descended dozens of feet, their walls cut with a strange precision. Here's where it gets strange. These finds weren't in one place. Mining crews working miles apart with no knowledge of one another kept finding and recording the exact same things. Trenches following copper veins, channels dug to drain water away from the pits, waste rock stacked neatly. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't casual, random gathering. This was planned, organized production. Then the tools turned up. Hundreds of stone hammers, some left exactly where they'd been set down thousands of years earlier, right beside the copper vein, waiting ever since. Some light enough to hold in one hand, others heavy enough to require real strength to lift. Who made these tools? Who spent hours, days, years working with them? And one more thing came to light, a technique called fire setting. Long before explosives existed, ancient miners would build a large fire against the rock for hours, then douse it with water to crack the stone instantly. This wasn't a method discovered by accident. It was tested knowledge passed down generation after generation. What's striking is that the very same technique was used by Bronze Age miners in Europe and the Near East. So what does that tell you? Take a moment. Do you think this could really have been the casual work of just a handful of people? But the real question was still ahead. Because a little later, a single piece of wood would turn the whole story upside down. Decades later, archaeologists began radiocarbon dating the timber supports pulled from these old shafts. They waited for the result, and the result silenced everyone. Some samples came back roughly 3,000 years old. Others were even older, long before the Roman Empire, even centuries before the Vikings crossed the Atlantic. Say that to yourself again. 3,000 years. Far earlier than you'd have guessed. From that point on, no one doubted that the mines were ancient. The question changed and grew larger. If people were extracting copper on this scale at Lake Superior for millennia, where did all that copper go? Whittlesey, in his report, cautiously put forward a figure. Somewhere between roughly 700,000 and 900,000 tons, that is, between 1.5 and 2 billion pounds, of copper may have been extracted. Modern archaeologists say that figure could be inflated. But even the most conservative estimates still talk about hundreds of thousands of tons. Whatever the number, the scale is genuinely staggering. And now the real problem surfaces. All the ancient copper artifacts ever found, from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi Valley, ornaments, arrowheads, tools, all of it combined, represent only a tiny fraction of what was extracted. So where did the rest go? Ask yourself for a moment, if it were you, where would you have taken that much copper? That question pulls researchers away from the water, straight across the Atlantic. And here things get even more complicated. In Europe, the Bronze Age produced enormous quantities of bronze, an alloy made mainly of copper and tin. For decades, some researchers have wrestled with one question: could Europe's own copper deposits really have met a demand that large? In recent decades, scientists have applied a method called isotopic analysis. Because copper forms under different geological conditions, copper from different regions can carry its own distinct chemical signature, almost like a fingerprint. Some studies claim that the chemical composition of certain ancient European bronze artifacts resembles Lake Superior copper. Other researchers disagree and say the evidence still isn't conclusive. Let's be honest and clear about this. There is no scientific consensus on this yet. This is not a proven fact. It's an open, ongoing scientific debate. I'm not presenting this to you as settled truth because science hasn't fully answered this question. But one thing hasn't changed. An enormous quantity of copper was extracted at Lake Superior, and most of it has never been accounted for. Now we arrive at the strangest part of the story. Because the answer doesn't come from archaeologists, it comes from the memory of the people who lived on this land for centuries. More than 30 years after Whittlesey's report in 1894, the Wisconsin Historical Society published conversations a researcher had recorded with Ojibwe elders. These elders' ancestors had lived on the shore of Lake Superior for generations. This lake was their home. They didn't claim to have discovered the mines themselves. What they remembered was something else: the people who had worked those mines. Picture it for a moment, a memory passed down generation after generation, a story told from grandmother to grandchild, from father to son. And the story goes, strangers came from the east, crossing the great water. They arrived in large canoes. They didn't wander the forest searching for copper, and as if they already knew exactly where to find it. They went straight to the mining sites, extracted the copper, and carried it back to the shore, to their boats. So why does this stand out so much? Because this account lines up remarkably with archaeological findings that were already known. The Ojibwe elders described rock being heated with fire and then cooled with water to crack it. Exactly the fire setting technique archaeologists had already found inside the mine pits. They described copper being carried down to the shore, to waiting boats. And today, we know that the largest ancient mining sites really are very close to the shores of Lake Superior and Isle Royale. Think about that again. These people, in 1894, weren't reading archaeological reports. They were simply repeating what their ancestors had told them. And yet what they said matched what the ground itself had already proven. The ending of the story is the strangest part of all. There's no battle, no catastrophe, no sudden disappearance. The elders simply remembered. After years, the strangers finished their work, loaded the last of the copper onto their boats, and set out across the water in the direction they'd come from. And the lake grew quiet again. Do you think that was really a peaceful farewell? Or is there a bigger story hiding behind it? Today, more than a century later, technology has advanced enormously. Radiocarbon dating is far more precise. Geological research shows how the copper formed millions of years ago. But the central question hasn't changed. No one doubts that the ancient mines exist. That's an undisputed fact in archaeology. The question begins after that. Who organized this massive undertaking? How was the knowledge passed from generation to generation? How many people worked these mines? And the hardest question of all, where in the end is the copper? The 1894 account doesn't prove any single theory. I want to stress that because oral tradition must always be weighed alongside archaeology, geology, and other historical sources. But the account is striking because it describes people who came specifically for copper, who knew exactly where to find it, who used methods matching the archaeological evidence, and who returned across the water once their work was done. The archaeological record preserves the mines. 19th century reports preserve the observations of the first engineers. The Ojibwe preserve the memory of the people who worked there. Each source tells part of the story. None of them tells all of it. And maybe that's exactly what makes it so fascinating. Maybe future excavations will turn up new evidence. Maybe advancing science will finally answer these questions. Or maybe part of the story is already lost forever. Nothing left but fragments scattered across old reports, museum collections, and memories that were recorded just in time. But one thing is beyond dispute. Long before the first American mining companies reached Lake Superior, long before Whittlesey wrote his report, long before the Ojibwe account was written down, someone here was extracting copper on a massive scale. Who were those miners? How did they organize their work? And where did most of the copper they carried away finally end up? These questions remain one of the most fascinating open mysteries in North American archaeology today. Maybe the answer will never be fully found, or maybe the very comment you leave under this video will give someone a new lead to follow. Now I want to leave you with two questions, and I want to see your answers in the comments. First, who do you think the Ojibwe elders meant by those who came from across the lake? Second, where do you think the copper they carried away finally ended up? Write it below. I read every comment, and I'll be discussing the most interesting theories in the next video. If this story fascinated you as much as it fascinated me, subscribe to the channel, because history still holds countless forgotten secrets, buried in old records, and we're going to keep uncovering them together.